Hi everyone, welcome to another podcast here at Politics to the Point. This will be a series of podcasts called United, and they will be about the social aspect of the Cyprus issue. And I'm very, very happy and super proud to have Andromakis Sophokleous with me today. Andromakis Sophokleous is a Cypriot political analyst and co-president of Volt Cyprus, that is a part of a pan-European movement. And she is working at the intersection of civil society, democratic reform, and European political integration in her capacity as co-president of Volt. But today she's here to talk about rebuilding trust within the two communities, her role as a political figure that has interacted a lot with Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots alike. And she is here to discuss social cohesion and the Cyprus issue and its future. So, Andromakis,
thank you so much for having me here, and I really appreciate being in a series of podcasts that are named United. It's
yes, you're the first guest, and I'm very happy.
It's a breath of fresh air to have journalists. I am following you. Sorry, just to mention this. It's a breath of fresh air to have these initiatives springing up from news channels like Politis.
Thank you, I appreciate it, and I have to say that I'm a huge fan of the podcast you co-host with Kemal Baykali, Nicosia Uncut, and I really like the slogan, Cold Hard Truth from the Divided Capital, because I don't think we highlight the fact that Nicosia is divided enough, especially in Europe, and we need to make a very firm point of that. And in that spirit, I want to start with the first part of this discussion, which is what mistakes we have made in terms of social cohesion after 1974 and the gap between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots through their culture, education, and these 51 years that have passed.
I think if there is one thing that we can pinpoint is the absence of a collective decision that we need to work on peace. Mm-hmm. And when I say collective decision, I mean even at the state level, but even in the social sphere. So the Cyprus problem and Cypriots, we have been through the collapse of the constitutional order, a coup d'etat, ethnic conflict, civic strife, an invasion, occupation, ongoing occupation, ongoing division. And sadly, we have never taken a decision as a society that we need to work on our wounds. We need to try to mend the wounds and our feelings about what happened in the past, and we need to shape a way forward, find a way forward, cultivate a dream about a way forward. I don't think we have done this. And I think that this is especially true in the Greek Cypriot community that seems to have chosen to stay stuck in its trauma, which I don't underestimate this trauma at all. It's a huge thing that we went through. But I don't think it's wise of us that we are raising new generations that are brought up with this trauma as well. And not only that, but we don't give them a way out as to what it is that they need to dream, what it is that they need to work about in order to basically have a better future than the one that we inherited. And I think that this is the single thing that we can pinpoint, the absence of a concrete decision about building peace, either at the political level or at the social level.
The political level kind of blends into the social aspect as well, but I mean, we are collectively voting in certain powers, and these certain powers have not moved towards that in the past 51 years. Why is that?
I think in all honesty, we need to speak about the hypocrisy of our politicians, in the sense that think about the fact that all our presidents that have ever been elected, they are elected based on the promise of working for a bizonal, bicommunal federation. That's all of them. Mm-hmm. Starting from Magarios, who had accepted it, since then, every president who has been elected, he vowed to work for a bizonal, bicommunal federation. Yes, but when you want to work for this, it means that at the political level, as Greek Cypriots, we have taken the decision that we need to share power with the Turkish Cypriots, that we need to solve the issue with the Turkish Cypriots. So if this is your political agenda, you put it forward, you get elected on this promise, then don't you have to do something in order to prepare the ground for that? promise? Don't you have to do something in order to make your people aware as to what the federation entails? Don't you have to work? Don't you have to work towards creating this culture of peace and coexistence? This is what has been absent, because we have politicians that are elected on the promise of giving a united island, bringing a federation, for good or bad. This is what they are elected on. And they don't work on what matters. We have this issue of, it's just words, it's just slogans, but no concrete policy towards that direction.
Yes, but to be kind of a devil's advocate, the people themselves do not demand that from their politicians. I mean, they are elected on that narrative, on that push, let's say, on that, a signal or symbol, but we're not there advocating for those actions. We don't even know what they look like.
Yes, I think we can discuss a lot about the fact that this traumatized society doesn't know what to call for. I think this is 100% true. But I would be cautious before we put the blame on the people in the sense that I understand that when you have, the Turkey factor, it's kind of appeasing, let's say, for the public to think, okay, what is there for us to do? And that's why I remember that back when we were doing the United Cyprus Now years, that we started with Kemal, and it was at the hype of the negotiations between Mustafa Akinci and Nikos Anastasiadis, and we saw there the desire by people to actually hear something positive. People are numb within them. If you're constantly bombarded with a narrative of victimization, with a narrative of what you did, of what you suffered, which obviously we suffered, but if you are never allowed to think of what the others suffered, if you are never allowed to think of the whole truth about the Cyprus problem, and we need to be cautious, because there are people who are dying today who remember how we got here. The kids that are brought up and raised in Cyprus, in the Greek Cypriot community today, they're not going to have a clear idea about what happened if this idea comes from the books that they read. Because the way that we teach our history in our schools, there is not in any way close to what really happened. So I think, obviously, as a person who has done so much and has worked so much in, bringing people out in the streets, and I feel constantly sad and disappointed at seeing people rallying around whatever, but about the thing that matters the most, which for me is working for peace on the island we fail. Yes, I have this personal sadness, let's say, but I would be wary from putting the blame on the people, because I understand the burden that we bring with us. And
yeah. But the question here is, what should have been done on a social level in terms of maybe introducing certain conflict resolution experts or social cohesion experts, or making it a mandate within policy, or new policy that would have been introduced after the war, to kind of mend those wounds and be able to say 51 years later, we are ready to start discussing the real issues.
Well, to be honest, and I think that we need to be in a position to acknowledge this, civil society on the island, if we can still hope for something, it's thanks to the people who have spent their lives working for what you have described. And there have been people in both communities that have spent their lives trying to set the path for peace, and they have spent their lives coming up with initiatives, working on peace building initiatives. However, that has a limit. What these initiatives can do, they have a limit, because we come back to what we said at the beginning. If this is not embraced at a state level, as a state level, as a policy priority, all these initiatives, they will remain on the fringes, they will remain sidelined, and ultimately they will remain within this, what we call the bicommunal bubble. Because I was
going to ask you about that.
Yes, but it exists, and I think we need to be in a position to acknowledge it. Otherwise, we cannot find the ways as to how to proceed about changing the issues. There is a bicommunal bubble that is created by people that, for some reason, at some point in their lives, they got engaged with bicommunal activities. They saw the merits in this. They are fully sold when it comes to the idea of a solution and of what true peace means on the island. But this remains in our very little spheres, in our very little bubbles. But of course, for this, I have to say that we can have a whole discussion about all the major pillars of our society and how they are when it comes towards peace. Do peace building initiatives get covered in our media? I can, as a person who has been involved in so great things, and I have seen people coming out in the streets, calling for noble causes. They get minimal coverage. Obviously, Politis is one of the media that is an exception to this. But if a Turkish Cypriot writes a stupid nationalist message on social media, it will be headlines in our media. During the COVID times, when you had Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots doing all this online, Instagram, it was the youngsters who were discovering how many similar words they had, and they had an amazing initiative and a trend going on Instagram back then. It was not covered anywhere. And I can give dozens of examples that if we had changed the way we portray some things, the feelings of the people would change. The stance of the people towards this would change. We cannot underestimate the importance of the collective narrative that goes about peace building.
I want to make a point here because I belong to that bubble, I believe, because when I was a teenager, I participated in one of such programs and it was very quiet. But I believe the reason it was quiet, at least in Limassol where I lived, was probably because of a general feeling of anxiety at that time, of making it too public and receiving all that, intense reaction from people that, don't belong in that bubble. And the main question here, and I haven't been able to answer that myself, is how do you burst that? How do you make those interactions happen? Because obviously, as an activist yourself, and we can discuss how you object to that term, you have interacted with people that are very pro-federation, very pro-unification. But what about the rest of them that aren't even open to having this discussion at all? How do we reach them?
Well, I think the one way to do that is by not imposing any limits in what they understand. What I want to say about this is that people who come from this bubble that we describe, it's very easy to put down the fears of others. If you have worked a lot within you to sort out your questions, to understand what happened, to calm yourself down about the injustice that this whole Cyprus problem is about, and you perceive and consciously understand that we need to work for peace in order to shape a better way forward for the island, we also need to accept another burden on our shoulders, which is to communicate this. But to communicate this in a way that will not scare people who are born and raised in another narrative. And we need to do it in a way that we need to appreciate that even people who are completely against coexistence, they might be called to live through, they might be called to share an island if we manage to solve the Cyprus problem. So I think the first thing that we need to do is to be aware of our biases. The first thing is to be aware of our bubble. That's the most important thing. And to be honest, that which is what I have been doing for the past 10 years, to be constantly trying to burst this bubble as well, to include other people in a way that will not scare them. And I have to say this as well, to also include a political direction to what we mean when we refer to coexistence. Because...
Please elaborate on that.
Because for good or bad, for good, but the crossing points, we have crossing points now since 2003. People can cross, people can engage in everyday activities. We see an increased interaction between the communities, an increased interaction between the sides. Yes, but you also need to have a voice there that will be saying, this interaction is perfect, let's continue it and let's turn it into a joint state. Because it's very easy to stay at this level of day-to-day engagement But it's very easy to lose sight of the fact that unless we solve the Cyprus problem, we are constantly at the threat of this collapsing. And I think that we saw this during the COVID times. This is what COVID, for us, and we said it many times, COVID should be that alarm bell that should make us all understand that as long as we don't have a Cyprus problem solution and a political agreement, everything we perceive as to living our lives on the whole island that has been facilitated by the crossing points could in any day disappear. And this interaction could disappear, these relationships could disappear, this inter-engagement could disappear. So we need to create citizens that will not only be okay to interact with one another, but will also know consciously that the best future for this island lies on unity. The best, rationally the best. Rationally when it comes financially, politically, geopolitically, in terms of security, we need to make a case about this. And I think that this is what has been missing for many years. And I have to say that being one woman who came forward, spoke clearly for a political solution, spoke clearly about the need for this political solution, I can tell you for a fact how difficult it is to do it, because people who speak about the political solution and not only about peace, they get attacked. Because the moment people might tolerate these major pillars that are against the solution, they might tolerate having peace-building initiatives here and there.
Yes.
But when they feel that the political voice becomes stronger, that says that the future of this island is not sustainable without the Cyprus problem solution, then they are determined to destroy it. And I have seen that happening. I have seen that happening with people who came before me. I have seen that happening in my experience. And I think that we need to be in a position to appreciate that it is difficult for people to come forward and demand this, because of the attacks, the scathing attacks, be it from traditional media or these days social media.
And political power, that's pretty significant as well. But it's a matter of rebuilding trust within the two communities and convincing these people that are against the idea of the united future for Cyprus. But in terms of practical tools, is it a communication strategy? Is it something deeper? How do you do it? Like with workshops, with an orchestrated attempt at bringing people together? How do you do it in terms of action?
I want you to imagine a scenario in which you have for a government that gets elected in the country. You have a president in the Republic of Cyprus. The president, especially under the state of emergency, he's basically supremely powerful. So imagine that scenario. This president comes out and he says, the number one issue that we have is the absence of a solution to the Cyprus problem. This impacts every single aspect of our lives. We cannot be a proper state unless we do that. And we first need to start working on our feelings towards what happens. You start with a truth commission. You say, okay, let's create a situation in which people can get answers as to what it is that they went through. You embrace all the bicommunal technical committee of missing persons. You make a point in everything that you do to mention that this was a joint pain. Both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots went through the same thing. On the day of the missing persons, you don't make simply statements reiterating the Greek Cypriot trauma. You make statements reiterating the Cypriot trauma. And you embrace this as a collective trauma that collectively we need to bring. You try to give awareness as to what each side did, and embrace the fact that we all suffered at different times and different places in history, but we all suffered, and we need to stop putting this on a scale, and we need to embrace this as collective pain that shows us the way forward. You ask from the Archbishop not to be including the Cyprus problem in his sermons during Christmas Day, and you ask him to keep it below. You incorporate a culture of peace building in your educational system. The educational system will not be putting people at 3 years old in their kindergartens and learning to hate the other side that got them. So imagine this. And the problem is that we are incapable of imagining someone doing this.
I would have said so myself. Like, it's very difficult to imagine that because of the backlash that you
Yes,
described before
yes,
and the general
yes.
culture. Because
So this is why I like, this is what I say when I say, yes, you need that it's all about the political will. If you look at Rwanda and if you read about the attempts that Rwanda, they have new problems now, but I mean, if you look at the attempts that they did in making sense of the horrid thing that happened in the 90s with the genocide, and how they tried to rebuild everything and from scratch, you can do it. You can do it if the political will is there, but you need to be aware that that will bring you in conflict with the major pillars in the Greek Cypriot community. But there is no way to get out of this otherwise, because all the rest have been tried. We have elected presidents, as we said, with the mandate to bring about a solution. But unless they embrace it fully, and unless we stopped acting like we do business as usual, there is no business as usual. We need to be in a position to explain to Greek Cypriots who don't understand why we discuss the Cyprus problem today, that their security is at stake at any point unless we solve it.
yeah, the issue I want to discuss as well. That's why I said it in the beginning, because you interact so much with the Turkish Cypriot community. On education, the education profile is run in the north by an anti-federation party. So when we talk about changing the narrative and making amends into how the kids are born into the society and understand conflict and understand resolution of this conflict, when each side at any given moment changes so drastically in its power to navigate this narrative, then how do you stop this pushback?
But that's true. I mean, in the Turkish Cypriot community, we had the case of the change of history books in order to give a better tone towards the concept of the Cyprus problem. And then when there was a change in who was leading the community, there was a change in the books as well. So I mean, you see that happening all the time. Or if you remember, there was an attempt, I think 20 years back, to change the books by Andreas Dimitriou. He was the Minister of Education. Then in the Greek Cypriot community, there was the huge backlash, and they weren't basically allowed to do it. So I think that we need to be in a position to appreciate this, that this is an issue. Having said that, though, and I need to put it in the picture, in the Turkish Cypriot community, and that has to do with their own particular case, because, and I want to be clear about what I want to say here, is that for good or bad, the Greek Cypriots, we have our lands occupied. We got evicted from our homes and our land is occupied, but our lives are not occupied. They are not under occupation from a foreign power, in the sense that we are not being controlled by a foreign power in our everyday affairs. We have managed to become a member of the European Union. We have international recognition. We have the recognition of our state, and we can travel and we can spend our lives everywhere, basically without acknowledging the Cyprus problem if we don't want to come across it. This is not the case with the Turkish Cypriots. Regardless of what your books tell you, there is no point in the life of a Turkish Cypriot that they are not going to come across what the Cyprus problem is causing them. They need to be in a constant attempt to see how they will travel, because if they don't have the Republic of Cyprus passport, they have to find a Turkish passport in order to be traveling. This means that, I mean, from the moment a Turkish Cypriot is born, they are called to face the impact of this abnormal situation in which they are in. This brings more discussion in the community. This brings more engagement in the community. This brings more dissent in the community. It brings people objecting, asking, challenging. And this is, I think, why we have a much more dynamic Turkish Cypriot community, a community that has come out in the streets. They overthrew their great leader, Rauf Denktash. They made a mini revolution. They opposed that regime. They now came out and they voted a pro-solution Turkish Cypriot leader, because they said, stop it with your nonsense about the two-state solution. We will never get recognized, and we are living the impact every day. So, I mean, In the Turkish Cypriot community, it's easier to ask the questions. You every day you come across what they don't tell you, regardless of the narrative that they want to give you about the so-called grandeur of the Turkish of the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. So, and in the Turkish Cypriot community, you also have a very dynamic teachers association. So if we are to discuss the pillar of education in the Turkish Cypriot community, they are progressive. They are the ones who were out in the streets. They are the ones who opened routes of revolution in the north. In our case, it's not the same. So we had in the north, we had cases in which the books were writing things that were creating hatred towards the Turkish Cypriots, but the teachers who were delivering the lesson, they were countering what the books were writing. They were telling their kids, look at the reality around you, this is not the case. So I mean, they had an active challenge to what the dominant narrative is. Having said that, things are very bad in the Turkish Cypriot community. The control by Turkey is increasing. Nationalism is becoming enhanced in the community. But we constantly need to be in a position to make the distinction between the experience of the Greek Cypriot and the Turkish Cypriot in the context of this.
Yeah, it's quite different, and I think each side doesn't understand what is going on at any given moment. But at the same time, I'm glad you mentioned the now, because I want to move towards the discussion and the social discussion that happens. I mean, we had Christmas and the holidays a couple of weeks ago, so everyone just sat on a table, and certainly these things come up in discussions, and we each form a different picture every year of how things are progressing, I should say. What happened, I think, in 2004 with the Annan Plan, and I want your two cents on that, is that socially the general understanding of what that solution meant was not communicated on either side, I believe. How do we fix that if we have the chance now with the new Turkish Cypriot leader, and if we follow through with our mandate? How do we fix that? How do we communicate what the solution means? What does Federal Cyprus look like?
You know, it's so funny, because if you Google, if you put on YouTube Bizonal Bicommunal Federation Cyprus, the only explanatory video in plain terms and in multimedia that you will find is a video that was done by the Cypriot Puzzle, an initiative in which I was part as soon as I came back from my studies abroad. It was an initiative of 15, 20 people, youngsters back then. We had come back from our studies, and we realized that the Cyprus problem was influencing all aspects of our lives. And appreciating what you just said, we wanted to create a platform whose motto was to inform and engage the Cyprus public on the Cyprus problem. And we appreciated what you just said, that people did not know what was being discussed. So I remember it was the 14th of February joint communique in 2014, and we wanted to explain it. And up until today, the only explanation in plain terms as to what the BBF is a video that a group of random youngsters did with 500 euros of a grant that we got from the youth organization back then. So I'm trying to say this in order to show that we need the initiative. We need the government, those who are negotiating, everyone involved, to be in a position to know that unless you include the public in what is being discussed, you can never hope to have anything positive. My involvement in the Cyprus problem that started especially with that initiative in 2014, the Cypriot Puzzle, which preceded Unite Cyprus Now, it actually came because I knew that even if you manage to succeed and reach the best possible constitutional outline in negotiations, if the people are not capable to support it, and they are not capable to know what it entails, if they are not capable to know the principles, if they are not capable to know what aspects of their lives might change, which are very few, the day after a solution, if they are not in a position to know that, they cannot defend it. And if they cannot defend it, it means they will be prey to whatever fake news will be flourishing. They will be prey to whatever fanatical movement that may take place, because a single gunshot after the solution, it can bring it all down again. Unless you have a public that will be there consciously positioned in protection of what will be achieved, saying that no, this is the best future forward for us and we will defend it. This is what was lacking in the 60s with the Republic of Cyprus constitution. We were lacking people to support it. Regardless of the problems of the constitution itself, it could be worked if it had people willing to support that new republic. And if you ask me about the 2004, I think that not only was it not explained, and I think that there is another gap as to the experiences of the two communities in that. So you had the Turkish Cypriots whose experience says, we came out, we overthrew Denktash, we had a revolution, we voted yes for a federal Europe, federal Cyprus, we voted yes for us joining the European Union. And then you have a Greek Cypriot community totally oblivious of this. We don't know the struggle, we don't know what it meant, what they did, what the Turkish Cypriots did when they came out in the streets. And we only have our side, which is presented with a plan that was not explained. If you ask me, we were presented with a plan that our then president did not even bother negotiating. I mean, Tassos Papadopoulos. So, yeah, and we are oblivious of their struggle of the Turkish Cypriots, and we didn't even discuss it. The Turkish Cypriot community was discussing the Annan plan much before the discussion started in the Greek Cypriot community.
So that is my whole point for this entire podcast, though. Like, how do you fight that? Because the general inclination of the people, starting from 1960, it wasn't the general mandate to have, Republic of Cyprus. People wanted Enosis, I mean, to their majority. How do you move forward? How do you emerge from that narrative? I mean, it's been so long. It's been 51 years, but again, the one is so open still.
Yes, and then you need to enhance that voice. I hate to bring politics into this, but because it's part of my personal journey, and my involved came at a point when I felt, okay, stakes are so high. I have done everything in my power. Like, I dedicated 10 years of my life working voluntarily for everything that has to do with peace building, bringing people together, having a political voice that is saying no. During COVID, I think we were a pivotal reason why they didn't manage to close fully the crossing points, as I believe it was their plan at that, because we stood
pushed
against it. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, and I've done so much, but then you reach a point in which you say, yes, but we will never change this unless we have political power, unless they feel that we are no longer a group of people on the fringes that they can pamper when they want to play that they are pro-solution, and then completely disregard when they are heading to elections and they want to pretend that they are.
It's a matter of appeasing the voter and their concerns. And what we discussed before starting filming was that, the Cyprus issue in polls appears to be, like, in terms of priorities, either fourth or fifth, I believe, to the general Greek Cypriot mind. But then at the same time, people that are pro-peace have emerged through this narrative.
Yes, but they must have had an instigation. The issue is, how do you maximize this? Because we are exceptions. The vast majority of Greek Cypriots, unless they have a particular interaction, unless they have something that causes them to challenge the mainstream narrative, they will never get out of that bubble, of the bubble of the narrative, I mean. I remember that in Unite Cyprus now, some of the things we were saying, I profoundly believe that if you look at the statements of Unite Cyprus now, from 2017 up until the 2020s and a bit later, it's the history of the Cyprus problem, I mean, explained. I remember back then we were discussing amongst us, we are basically saying things that go against 50 years of propaganda. Because if for 50 years you have never encountered someone telling you, basta, they also suffered. Then there comes a group that tells you, let's unite, let's appreciate our wounds, let's appreciate our common trauma. And you're like, what's the common trauma? No, we suffered. The Turks came. And so all movements that have ever tried to say something different, they basically have to come against 50 years of propaganda.
Yeah.
And I have to put this in the picture that the trauma that is not lived but that is passed on is a stronger trauma than the lived trauma. And it creates more animosity and it creates more hatred. So the grandchildren of someone who lost their home back in the 1970s and during the invasion, unless they are brought up knowing, they will bring with them a burden on their shoulder to carry the trauma.
They will inherit
I
this.
speak with so many kids. It's so terrifying to see. I speak with so many kids that are challenging themselves as to the fact that they like a Turkish Cypriot. I see people coming up to me and asking me, I am from Agios Georgios in Kyrenia. My grandfather died. I never went. And now I'm thinking that I never saw my granddad's village and I don't know what to do. And can you help me? And I'm thinking of all the burden that we put on these people because we make them feel that it's a betrayal to visit their grandparents' places.
There's
or it's
a level of guilt.
There is a level of guilt. I see people, how difficult it is for them to remove from their shoulders this burden that it's our educational system, it's the way we raise our kids in appreciating what this island could be. I remember, and I've given in the past this example again, I remember during the Unite Cyprus Now time, we were doing these so-called dialogue groups, and we were trying to bring people that had never had in circles. You were discussing breaking the bubbles. That's what we were trying to do back then. Small, safe spaces, bringing people who had never had contact with people from the other community. And we're bringing them in these closed circles and having discussions. The discussions might not have even revolved around Cyprus problem, could be whatever. And I remember in one of these dialogue sessions that I was present, and there was this 25-year-old Turkish Cypriot who was saying his feelings about when he first saw a Greek Cypriot after the crossing points opened, and he was telling us about this nightmare that he had when he was younger, about these blue monsters running after him. And he said what a shock it was for him when the crossing points opened and he realized it's normal people like us. And I remember after the end of the session, there was this Greek Cypriot, 19-year-old. He had just finished the special forces in the army. And he came up to me trembling and he was like, I had the same dream when I was young. And I just finished the army, he told me, and we were learning to kill these people, to hate these people, and he was shocked. I remember his shock, and he was telling me, and now I see him here, and he had the same nightmare
like
that I had.
Yeah.
So, and to be honest, just a disclosure, this thing with the blue and red monsters, I have heard it from many people having nightmares. So I mean, imagine the burden that we put on the shoulders of our youth when we don't show them a way out. And hatred and wanting to solve things with war, it's never a way out. It's complete enslavement. So we need to liberate our people, and we need to liberate them in a way to be able to imagine a better Cyprus for all of us, a united Cyprus for all of us, and a Cyprus that will be directed towards peace.
I want to talk to the optimist Andromachi and the pessimist Andromachi at the same time. And I want to ask you, optimist Andromachi, what does the future look like to you right now? Like seeing what's happening now with the new election and the progression, if there has been any, towards that. Can you picture something happening in the future?
No, you will never get an optimist and a pessimist Andromachi. You will always get a realist Andromachi who, regardless of how I perceive things around me, I keep pushing. Because that's the only way out. Things are not looking good. And things are not looking good, not only for the island, things are not looking good for Europe, things are not looking good for the world. And I'm so sad because at a point in which the geopolitical order is collapsing, places with unsolved problems are the most vulnerable ones. Mm-hmm. And we have seen this. We have seen it in Ukraine, we have seen it in Gaza, and I'm I honestly don't like being a Cassandra, but I think that we might see it in Cyprus as well. We have an unsolved problem at the point in which international order is completely collapsing. So I'm not optimistic in any way, but what I say is that there is no way to create optimism unless you work. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm doing. I think that we all need to keep pushing, to keep saying and reiterating that there are no frozen conflicts, that this thing could come back and beat us at some point, that we need to appreciate that on this island, there is no peace. There is just absence of war. I think this is what we don't appreciate.
It's like a pause button was pressed.
Yes. It's absence of war. Mm-hmm. If there is no peace. And I am very, very sad that I see that there is this glorification of trauma as well. It's like we want to disregard all the positive things, and we want to keep pretending like we are in a battlefield. Mm-hmm. And this constant simile with what happens in Ukraine is again...
I mean, if 90% of your boys are either spending 2 years of their life or 1 year of their life in the army...
But even that, isn't it astonishing that honestly the powers that whose solution is a war for this, we are gonna sacrifice our kids. We're gonna sacrifice, like we don't have a professional army. It's our kids that will fight. And in this setting, instead of all of us coming up and saying, no, this is not what we want, we need to find a way to work for peace, we emerge, we go back and deep into this militarism and this appreciation of militarism and machismo and warmongering and this hardcore realism that it's the powerful that can dominate, as if Cyprus can never be the powerful party in this conflict. So my message is that the only way to create something better is to work for it. That's as optimistic as Andromache can go. But I keep working. My analysis is what I present you, but I keep working for a reunified island because I see that as the only way for a better future on the island. So I think that we need to keep pushing, and we need to be in a position to appreciate that everything that we have done and everything that has happened towards peace, it's never in vain. We need to be in a position to appreciate that the greatest empires that have collapsed, the day before they collapsed, they were in existence. So we need to be in a position to appreciate that we could collapse
at any given moment.
But we also need to be in a position to appreciate that we could change the situation at any given point, that we need to be using everything in order at the right time to push for what will be peace on the island.
Say that we post this podcast and it reaches a young Andromache equivalent or a young Nikia equivalent. What do you have to say to that person who's probably coming back to Cyprus in a few years or in Cyprus at the moment and just wondering what this thing is gonna evolve into? What do you have to say to that young person?
Miguel, this question is very difficult because every time a friend of mine tells me that he's either not coming back or leaving the island, I feel relieved that they are saving themselves. It's not, and I'm saying this in full. And I'm saying this as someone who gave up opportunities to go abroad because I've been working on this. But I think it's not, Cyprus is an island that if I was doing a risk assessment, we are at a very perilous and dangerous point. Mm-hmm. Honestly. I can tell you that I can see, if not war, I can see strife again. I can see conflict on the horizon, and things are not looking good. And I think that the absence of the Cyprus problem, of the solution to the Cyprus problem, and this is what is often missed from the picture, because we are also sick and tired with the Cyprus problem, because kids are born and they are 3 years old and they have someone telling them about this Cyprus problem, and they're sick and tired. They don't want to hear about it, but it impacts every single aspect of our lives. It impacts the state of our democracy. It impacts this complete corruption. Is also there was this slogan at some point, partition and corruption go hand in hand, and that's so true. And why am I saying this? I'm saying this that our inability to solve the Cyprus problem has really left us without prospects. What are the prospects that today we can give to younger people about the life on this island? To fight in a war against Turkey in order to liberate the north, which is literally the dominant narrative in the far-right circles that are becoming enhanced today? Is this the dream that we want to give our kids? Financially, we have exploited our natural resources north and south. We have destroyed our environment because this state of uncertainty allows us to do it. What is it that we can offer to our kids? Corruption, instability, insecurity, financial obstacles, complete inequality that is also enhanced by the Cyprus problem solution, absence of a solution. So it's a very difficult question what you're asking, because I don't want to be the one to say don't come back. And I'm saying this as someone who has consciously stayed on this island and is trying to make things better. But it's not a nice place. It's things are not looking good.
Yes, but something is keeping you here.
Yes, the sense of purpose, I think my desire to, first of all, to be very honest, and at some point in my life, after United Cyprus Now, I took the conscious decision that even professionally, I let myself, I took the professional decision to remain a freelancer. And the major reason why I did that was that I did not want to have a boss that would have to either dictate what I say publicly or have any blame for what I say publicly, especially on such a thorny issue that people are not willing to accept. And I think that back then I realized that there are not many people left, especially my generation. I'm astonished that you coming from Limassol, especially coming from Limassol, and at your age, and gives me hope as well, that you have this instinct in you, because I could not see it, and that's what I've been trying. But I cannot say that I'm not defeated.
Yeah, but I mean. There is a lot of defeatism in this field, let's say, but at the same time, what I'm trying to pick your brain at is how do we duplicate or multiply Andromachis in this island to keep the hope, to keep these people here, to.
We need to keep pushing. We need to keep pushing. We need to have a clear sense of purpose, a clear sense of direction. We need to know that the moment you come in, you will be attacked. You will see your face mocked. You will have to and I'm saying this as someone who has accepted this, but at the same time, I also have empathy for those who say I cannot do it now. I cannot expect everyone to be in a position to see their face humiliated every day on social media because they say they want a solution. I cannot ask it of anyone else, regardless of the fact that I did take this decision, and regardless of the fact that the hope that I get when I see younger people. Your Christothea in Politis is the other woman who at some point, really, she was so young and she came. And I remember the people that give me hope. I'm mentioning her as another younger person that I could see that she cares about this thing, and that
It's a matter of
astonished
caring.
me.
It's a matter of
Yeah.
caring, but you yourself can carry people together with you.
Yes, that's what we keep trying. And we did a lot of work, and I'm very proud about everything we've done. Like if I look back, I do feel that we've done so much. But at the same
There's more to
time,
do.
there's a lot more to do. We need to become more. We need to become cool as well when it comes to this issue. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
But what I can say is that for me, my hope comes from action. That's the dogma of my life. Hope can only come from action. It cannot come, and that's why even if my analysis is very cynical, my life, everything I do, like I spend my life actually working against what I write in my analysis or what I see as a future for Cyprus. But that's the importance of being active. That's the importance of hoping. And that's also the importance of knowing history and knowing how things can change if there are people who keep pushing.
And believing in that change.
Yes, and knowing that change will not come one day. You need to be removing the pieces of the wall. Every single day, with everything that we do, we are removing a piece of the wall until the time comes that there is the capacity that it can crumble away. Yeah.
It was a wonderful discussion, I must say.
Thank you.
And I really
Same
appreciate
here.
you for coming. And I'm really glad that this was our first United podcast. And I hope these things continue. And I hope you have the power and the courage to persevere and achieve many more great things towards peace.
If there is a positive thing that we can say about this thing is that the fact that a media channel in Cyprus does a podcast that is named United is in itself a success. Let's hope that we have the time to do it before other things hit us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for coming
you.
and thank you for watching. And we will speak soon.